Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us for the first Housing Hive of 2025. We'll just wait a few seconds just for everyone to filter through from their prior meeting, and then we'll get started with intro, a little bit of background on the topic, introduce Arturo, who's our guest speaker today, who many of you will be familiar with already, and then yeah, we'll run through the topic itself today. But yeah, it's another one of those which I think for us in our position, we always like to cover topics which are, I suppose, discussion points in the sector at any one time. And I think at this point, it's with so much change happening in the digital landscape and artificial intelligence sort of changing literally day by day at the moment, it feels like. It's one of those which we're having lots of conversations about at the moment. So, and Arturo being an expert, a very well-known expert in the area, should be an interesting one today. So it's one which, yeah, we always plan these in on the back of trending discussions, I suppose, and the sector's obviously under increasing pressure to deliver more efficient, customer-centric services, I suppose, while keeping that keen eye and ensuring compliance and with regulatory requirements, which again are kind of evolving all the time. And along with that, as I say, the kind of AI-driven technologies, and when we talk about AI, we're including both machine learning and generative AI in there. They are obviously opening up new opportunities to improve service delivery in various areas and automate certain processes and enhance decision making with data-driven decision making as well. But it also does come with challenges, obviously, and there is concerns around potential security concerns, data quality concerns of AI-generated misinformation in certain areas as well. So we will touch upon those, and if anyone's got any questions on those points, feel free to pop them into the chat pane as well. We'll cover the importance of data foundations and why that's critical in terms of having those as a priority in terms of strength of them, but also how housing providers can prepare for the next phase of transformation, ensuring that accessibility and responsiveness and future readiness, I suppose, are at the forefront. But yeah, just I suppose to set the scene briefly, Arshura is going to be talking to us about different types of AI, the application of those in social housing space, the impact of poor data quality, but also how us in the housing sector can harness technology and digital specifically to meet those rising expectations as well, which is something obviously us at Proda get quite heavily involved in. But yeah, with that kind of introduction out of the way, Arturo, I wonder if now would be a good time for you to touch upon your intro, and I'll hand over to you very soon as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, morning everyone. Great to see so many people to come and see this session. And yeah, the plan is I was asked by Jake and Zach to put something together which talks about what's in store, maybe a little bit of crystal ball for 2025, which is never easy. So I've done my best to pick up a few things that I'm hearing in the sector and try and link it all together, hopefully with something that you can take away in terms of some of the insights and some of the considerations in there. So yeah, that's the plan. Hopefully we'll have some time for Q&As at the end as well. So shall I start sharing my presentation now?
Yeah, go for it. Sure, that would be great. And yeah,
Wonderful.
just quickly on that Q&A phase, we have had a couple through the registration form as well, so we'll address those, and we've got some for you as well, Troy, just to keep that Q&A rolling as well. But yeah, as I say, if anyone does have any others, please I would encourage you to pop those into the chat area, and we can look to address those with Arturo towards the end as well. Yeah, but yeah, I'll hand over to you, Arturo. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Well, as I said, morning everyone. Glad to be here and sharing some of my thoughts around what's in store for the sector in 2025. So just briefly about me, I'm Arturo Dell. I'm a director at Knowledge Industries, and I work quite extensively in housing and the public sector in general around data strategy, data quality governance. So I have a really good picture of what things are happening. So what I thought I would do for today is just bring a few things together that I think are going to be really important in 2025. and mainly focus on the data side, but also bring in some of the digital aspects, because I know this audience here is perhaps most interested in the digital element, but I think covering the data part is very important as a foundation for good digital services. So that's the plan. We'll have time at the end for Q&A. So let's get going. So here's the agenda, how I've structured the session. So the idea is to go through data as a key driver, and whether we think that the sector will finally benefit from AI. I think open question, but one definitely for 2025. Then I want to talk about data management. I know not the sexiest topic, but I think something that's coming up more and more in my conversations with organizations is kind of all the learning that we can do from the regulatory environment, and that's very interesting. And then in the next section, we're going to cover the standards for collecting resident data. Not sure how familiar the audience here is with some of the work, but I think some of it is pivotal, and I expect it will be growing in importance this year. Then I'll talk a little bit about digital services in housing, not in great detail, but just to kind of link some of the data elements to it, and then some areas of learning to keep an eye out for. And then we'll summarize and hopefully some time for Q&A. So let's get started then. So as we said, it all starts with AI today. So in all the conversations that I have, many organizations are debating how do you add value through data. And now it's very interesting that just one bit of technology has captured the imagination in such a way that absolutely everything is AI nowadays. So you just have a service that it's always been this service, now it's powered by AI, or exec teams are saying how can we bring AI, and it's just everywhere. So I thought it's funny that in a way all our problems seem to be solved by AI, but that's not quite the case, and I'll go into a little bit more detail around this. So just as a very simple definition, I think it's useful to separate the kinds of AI and what to use when. So interestingly, machine learning used to be kind of the greatest and most advanced form of AI. I think it still is in many places, but probably looking at machine learning as a more dedicated aspect. So machine learning can also be called narrow AI. It works in specialist areas. It's got years of usage across the sector, and the potential is better understood. So even though the trend will be to go with generative AI, to go in the more direction of the newer developments, I think we mustn't look down on everything that's been achieved with machine learning over the last few years. The other advantages can work with smaller data sets, and this is really important. The models are more understandable and less obscure. You can explain how decisions are arrived at through some of the machine learning work in the sector. And of course, can be used for predictions, descriptions, and recommendations. These are kind of the main applications in the sector. Now, generative AI is the new exciting development in this space. And of course, as you know, it can create new content based on its training data. It's incredible to think that it's just over 2 years since the launch of ChatGPT. But there's real concerns around hallucinations and its impact on critical services. But already early on, we're seeing great potential in summarization of meetings, generating new content, and potentially increasing productivity. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail. So I thought it was helpful to kind of frame the different types of AI and start kind of making some differences. So let's start with machine learning and focus on some examples of the uses in housing. So I think the main and the most powerful usage of machine learning is for risk verification. And this is very much in the rent-to-rear space. There's products either by specialist companies or developed in-house that do a very good job of assessing through multiple data sets whether how to chase payments or how to manage the work of the income team. So very mature space in housing. Now the other one that I think is quite interesting is customer segmentation. So we're seeing more of a trend towards backing some of the customer segmentation work that happens normally through surveys or more traditional analysis with some machine learning, particularly clustering some of the data just to back what comes out of the survey. So, and this, let's focus on this one a little bit later, because I think everything around customer segmentation is absolutely essential for the delivery of digital services down the line. There's also a lot of work on damper mold and some models that are beginning to predict properties at risk. I think this has been a key priority in the sector, and I think the results are very exciting in terms of being able to predict properties and act before any harms. And then going into kind of the more exciting and newer opportunities that we're seeing with some of the machine learning examples are around computer vision. So there are some organizations that are looking at whether some photographic analysis, maybe satellite images, can help decide which roofs to repair. Where else can we use computer vision to start providing some insights, perhaps combined with some other techniques? But I think this is a space where more and more the data that we hold as organizations visually in the form of inspections, in the form of a lot of activities that happen within communities can become very handy. And then another example that I wanted to mention is understanding things that are more complex and multifaceted, like disrepair cases, and how to kind of figure out the tipping point for a disrepair case. And there's examples, similar examples to this around complaints as well. Is there a possibility when you've got these multifaceted problems to actually say, I think this is the point in which it's very likely to end up in a disrepair case or to end up in a complaint? So a lot of really good examples of this currently in the sector. Now, what about generative AI? So I think one of the things that is fascinating about generative AI, and is different from all the other techniques in kind of data analytics, is that it appears as a consumer technology first. So the first experience that we have of it is probably at home, playing around with ChatGPT, creating some images, and then you start bringing that kind of consumer first into the workplace. And every technology that kind of appears in this way always has a very different diffusion of technology approach. So I think that stands out as a very different element. Then I think the risks of hallucinations and mistakes are a concern. And I know in the conversations that I'm having with organizations in the sector, there is a lot of concern around how much of an impact it can have on wide enterprise adoption. Now, what I think was a bit of a complete change was the integration into Microsoft products, because in a way, at the very beginning, when this technology appeared, and in the early discussions, there were lots of concerns around where the data is going, how to actually control who's inputting anything into the tools. There's the famous case of some intellectual property that was leaked through applying it into kind of some of these products. So I think bringing it into Microsoft and having all that assurance and integrated into existing products was the start of kind of an adoption curve. Of course, the challenge is that the cost of the Copilot product are really a barrier. Implementing it and rolling it out to the whole organization is quite prohibitive for most organizations. And then organizations are taking different approaches to control usage. I think it'd be interesting to find out from organizations here in this session. Some of them are going all the way from blocking AI tools. Others are just monitoring, providing policies to explain to people what they should and they shouldn't include. But there's other questions that are deeper, which are around: do you have HR approaches to what is expected from people to do themselves, and what should they just use Copilot or some form of generative AI to help? And yeah, I said this already, there's excitement within executive teams who really want to benefit from this technology. So from a perspective of having the doors open to influence and really make a difference with the technology, it's there, but there are all these concerns around it. So
I was just going to mention also, it's really interesting your point on how you sort of mentioned there that it's the Gen AI stuff appearing as a consumer first technology or consumer technology first, and totally agree with that. Even thinking about, was it last week or the week before, OpenAI's upcoming release Operator, which is just obviously available in the US right now, but thinking about the examples that they put forward there on the promotion around it, it was, oh, you could use this yourself to find a recipe that you'd like and add the types of food that you need to make that recipe into your cart and buy it, or you could book a sort of a weekend away based on where you want to go and who you want to take with you and what you're interested in doing and things. So I think you're right. It is very much, it does appear as that consumer first piece at the moment, doesn't it? But with the likes of these sorts of things, opening the doors of content creation, but also now with the likes of Operator and others, it's one which you immediately think and sort of translate the potential into the workplace, don't you? And into sort of organizations like housing associations of how could we help tenants with these sorts of prompts take action on their behalf. But again, it does kind of feed into that point of the worries around hallucinations and what errors might come up that maybe we're not kind of prepared for, which I think in a way partly feeds into the housing sector, maybe in some areas being a little bit behind from other industries from a digital adoption point of view, would you say?
Yeah, I think that there's two key points to think about when technology comes as a consumer technology first, which is that it's not ready-made for the enterprise, and it's quite tricky to then translate something that you enjoy at home in a safe, controlled, managed way. So everyone here probably has heard about the term shadow IT, and there couldn't be anything more damaging than bringing something as powerful as generative AI as shadow IT into an organization. So that's why controls are put in place to actually block the applications in some cases, and in others to bring some strong policies around it. But with any kind of revolutionary technology, how you adopt it is very difficult. So in this case, we don't know, and this is what I'm trying to cover here in this discussion, is really predicting where this is going to go. It's just growing and getting faster is all I can say at the moment.
Yeah.
So let me continue with the thinking here around. So we have all of these kind of, I would say, speculations around generative AI, but I think if we look at research, and I've listed here two papers that I think are very interesting in terms of kind of large-scale attempts at understanding what generative AI at work means. So I've put the quotes, just links to these papers here at the bottom. But basically, it's one that looks at a call center and the productivity of workers in a call center, and the other one is a very famous study that was done with Boston Consulting Group, where they got some of their consultants with the tool and some of their consultants without the tool, and then compared the performance of Boston Consulting Group staff based on the use of the technology. So I've just picked up a few interesting findings from the research. So the first one is that, and these are kind of high level distillations, so they're not immediately applicable to housing, but let's have a think about this. So generative AI is very good at some things and very bad at others. So it's very strange to have a technology that you can actually ask to do something and it completely blows your mind, but then you ask it to do something else and it's terrible at it. And actually, there is, of course, more and more as it gets used, you'll know what it is good at and bad at. But really, you have to just try and use for its capabilities. So this is a challenging space. And in one of the research papers, they call this the jagged frontier of generative AI, which means that it's good at some things, bad at others, but also it's constantly shifting. But the findings around productivity are really, really interesting. So the productivity improvements are very significant for novice workers. So between 30% to 40%, but actually minimal for experienced workers. Now, what does this mean in housing? So if you take a lot of different areas in housing with high turnover, some of the things that we find challenging as a sector is being able to get someone onboarded and effective very quickly. It always happens that they have some period of onboarding, but then they need to sit next to someone who's been in the team for years and knows all the details in order to become productive. Well, some of the finding here is that being able to pair novice workers with an effective Gen AI tool really increase their productivity. So very interested. Also, what does it mean that it doesn't improve so much for experienced workers is another one. And then finally, workers using generative AI fall asleep at the wheel. Now, the way this was exemplified was that as they start using generative AI, they become kind of less aware of the possible issues and kind of, because generative AI is very authoritative in the way it describes its kind of outcomes, then it's very easy to just go with it. So in some tasks that were particularly selected that a generative AI is bad at, the people who were using generative AI generally got those wrong. And there's many examples, for example, in HR where they use these type of tools for CV selections or things like that. There is a tendency to just over-trust it. So imagine this combination of a tool that can be wrong, can hallucinate, but also creates this sensation in people that you kind of fall asleep at the wheel. You let it have these kind of issues. It's something that really needs to be worked on from an implementation perspective. So what I think, and here again, trying to predict something, I think the opportunity for generative AI in housing is to use the organizational knowledge that we've built over years of experience to raise all workers to the top tiers of performance. So in a way, if we can use this technology to bring to life all of this information that we have across multiple documents, across multiple policies, and bring it as an organizational knowledge base, it would make a huge difference in productivity, in the ability for staff to be more effective quicker when they join, and also this links very interestingly with something that the regulator and the ombudsman are saying about how housing are managing their knowledge. So perhaps, and this is a speculation, there is an opportunity to try and bring this organizational knowledge through these tools. So, yeah.
I think we're still on your previous slide on the screen. Just to mention, Arturo. There we go. That's the one.
Am I here?
There we go. I think we've caught up now. Yeah, thank you.
This is the. Am I in the opportunity for generative AI in housing slide?
Yes. Yeah, got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is the one I was saying, that when you take all of that into account, I think this is where the big opportunity in housing is. So let's kind of unfortunately add a few buts to this dream. Just checking, Jake, have I moved to my next slide?
Yes, looking good. Spot on.
Excellent. So we have all these expectations, but in reality, we do have some significant challenges with our data. And I think many of you probably know that introducing generative AI Copilot into the organization will, bring in a lot of this data. Some of it includes the organizational knowledge, but some of it includes stuff that potentially you shouldn't have, and in some cases, stuff that you actually don't have that you need. So a little bit of real world check here. Now, I've always, when I talk about topics around data quality or governance, I always try to find a way to measure this. Now, thankfully, in the last, I think this came out in September last year, MHCLG have done some work to actually understand the impact of kind of failure demand on housing services. I've again linked to this report. It came from Local Digital, and it just focused on 2 housing services, repairs and its allocations. And not everything is related to data, but just between these 2 services, there's a potential of 400 million efficiency savings a year if some of these failed attempts are tackled. And there's recently a report published that the government, across government, is trying to save 45 billion in productivity improvements. This is all an agenda that is really driving it now to say, yes, we understand data quality is a problem, we understand that it generates issues, but considering what's at stake here in terms of efficiencies, it needs to be tackled. So this is a very useful report that I recommend people read, particularly around who are interested in costing the impact of poor data on services. So, as I said again, it's a priority for our key stakeholders, the regulator of social housing, the Housing Ombudsman Service. They have made it absolutely clear, and it's driving the sector. So I want to focus on, I hope many of you have heard about the Knowledge and Information Management, the KIM report, and what it actually means and where I think it's going to go next year. It's already been out for 18 months or so, and I've seeing more and more impact of the kind of what the report is trying to say on how organizations are tackling their data. So the KIM report is an opportunity for change, and it has 21 recommendations, but I just want to focus on a few that I think are the key ones. They're all incredibly important, but they're the key ones from the perspective of data and building data for digital. So the first one is defining the oversight role of governance for knowledge and information management. Now, many of you may have data governance programs. Definitely all organizations have a strong governance function around the board and around general governance. But what does it mean to have governance for knowledge and information management is something that this KIM report is asking organizations to think about. The second, and this is kind of a really important one, is to implement a strategy. What should knowledge and information management look like in your organization? And the report has a lot of advice on the components that should be in this strategy. Now, reviewing internal guidance around recording vulnerabilities is incredibly important because it starts making us think about what data are we collecting on our residents? What is it? What is the purpose of it? What are we doing with this data? Then this number 7 is to develop organizational key data recording standard requirements. And this is incredibly important because, as you know, some of the sources of poor data quality is inconsistency in how we record the data, inconsistency in how we input it, and there's some real sector effort in getting some standards for this developed. Then review existing databases for capability and capacity to record the key data requirements. There always will be a problem with the systems, and kind of being able to have appropriate systems to record this is essential. And finally, number 13 is really all about, can you, once you've got the data in these systems, can you triangulate, can you get it all out and then interrogate it and use it usefully? So of the recommendations, I just want to focus on recommendation 7, which is the key recording standards. And I think this is being incredibly led by the NHF, who have put together this group with lots of people in the sector involved. Maybe some of you here are part of it. It's called Knowing Our Homes, and they have, in October, they released their proposals on collecting resident information. It's a really great list, a starting point, but a very important starting point for the discussion around why are we collecting this data. And the beauty of this is that they've engaged with HACT on the data standards, but also reviewed CORE and the census to actually come up with a really good standard. So the data set is nothing that you wouldn't expect. It's got 7 items, 7 key data items to collect. Nothing surprising here: ethnicity, age, gender, disability and long-term health conditions, support needs. Now, let me just stop there for a second. They have separated disability and long-term health conditions from support needs, because following the concept of you only really need to be collecting data that is relevant to the service that the resident is due to receive. So separating this makes a lot of sense. Language barriers, contact details. And landlords should also try to keep this information for all residents who live in the properties, not only for the lead tenant, whoever owns the tenancy. So a very, very important data set. And I think in 2025, I fully expect that this will become something that organizations will look at, will revise what they're collecting, will have sessions to understand whether it's appropriate, will look across different systems to see whether it's consistent across systems, whether they've got issues. And the NHF say very clearly that this is just a starting point. It doesn't mean that you cannot collect more than this, but of course, it always needs to be balanced with any GDPR type concerns, ensuring that the data is collected for the right reason.
With those key data items in that sort of that kind of standard, Arturo, based on your experience of working on data strategy and sort of helping housing associations in this sort of area, how far away would you say we are from this right now in terms of the types of data that housing associations collect? I know part of it feeds into the legacy systems piece and maybe the struggles around segmentation, but do you see this as something which is going to take a lot of work to get there? Are we close, or is it? What do you think?
Yeah, I think part of what's great about the work that the NHF have done is that they have based it on what people are actually doing. And I think a lot of this you see in most organizations. I think the challenge is that it's inconsistent. It's inconsistent across systems, it's inconsistent across organizations, and it's got lots of gaps. So, for example, trying to understand disability and long-term health conditions is very difficult. It's very hard to be able to validate some of these data sets. But I wanted to highlight this because as we're moving the discussion towards digital, it's very difficult to be able to design services that are based on personalized to the user without understanding these key attributes and then how to do it. And then you come up with some really interesting findings, for example, that you would assume that digital services are really favored by younger age residents, and that is very true. But in some cases, you find, looking at this data, that they also maybe have favored by some people with some form of health conditions, particularly mental health conditions, where they find it easy to engage in a more digital way. So a lot of richness in this. So, but getting it right, getting the foundations right, is really what the Kim report is pushing. And I think because it's being pushed at a regulatory level, it can really have an impact long term for the sector in terms of what we collect.
Yeah, makes sense.
Brilliant. So conscious of time, let me just speed up a little bit so we have time for questions. So if we think about this as really the foundation for delivering digital services, this is the foundation for delivering kind of analog or real world tangible services. But when we think about digital, all of this data is absolutely essential. So if we think about digital today, I love this definition, and it's very old, but I think it still applies perfectly well. Digital is applying the culture, processes, business models, and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. And I think so far, digital hasn't changed so much in the last 15 years that we've been doing digital transformation, not to kind of apply this same thinking. So I think this is still completely valid, and I just take one example just to illustrate this, which is payments. So if we look at digital around payments, we think, okay, let's start with the raised expectations. So nowadays, probably 15 years ago, it was great to be able to pay online, and you'd be glad you do that. But after that's been achieved, you expect to be able to pay on your mobile. You expect to be able to pay anywhere. You expect nowadays with open banking, you expect to be able to be transferred to your own bank from any interaction without having to log off and log on. And so what is really important to consider about this definition is that digital in this perspective is not something that you can actually say we've achieved. We now have digital services and we're delivering what we need to deliver. You have to constantly be aware of the raised expectations. And this goes into the next point. My prediction for 2025 around digital comes particularly from the element of the raised expectations. So I just want to point out these two documents which came out, I think, last week. And there's been, for those of you who follow the goings on of central government, you'll know that the government digital service, GDS, was so influential in terms of driving digital and creating best practice. It was probably the best digital government kind of application in the world a few years ago. But with raised expectations, I think the government now is pushing for a complete reboot of how this is done, to add a lot more energy and actually use digital to try and claw back some of those 45 billion pounds of productivity savings that they're planning to tackle. So I think this is something that is starting now. It's probably been going on since the changes within the different departments, but I strongly recommend to look at these documents, particularly the blueprint, which I think is very interesting. And I've picked up a few points on this. First of all is the vision for a modern digital government. And I know that in housing, perhaps housing associations don't necessarily feel part of government, but ultimately it's a sector that is part of the wider public sector. And as such, I think it's very important to look at this. So very quickly, it's got a few points around the vision. The element around easier lives is probably the one that I think is most interesting, because it talks about how the services, the next generation services, do the hard work for the public. Talks about universal access, and really, very importantly, designed around the user. This continues to be the key point. Talks about faster growth, which is more on a business side. Talks about firmer foundations, which, if you take at it from a sector and our organizations, we can see the level of threat around cyber. So securing services for trust is incredibly important. And then the last one is smarter organizations, which again links so much to all the data stuff that we were talking about before, which is changing how delivery is done, the right ways of working, and moving at the same pace as people's lives do. So lots of really important concepts that is going to be driving this vision for modern digital government. And of course, we said before, higher productivity and efficiency. Who knows? It could be powered by Gen AI. That's something that jury's out, but it's very interesting. So the last one I wanted to focus on before we go to Q&A is around easier lives. So from all the points, I think this is the one that resonated the most to me in terms of a vision for digital services and what it's going to start to look like. So the next generation public sector services will do the hard work for the public. What does this mean? anticipating, reminding, and connecting. Now, this links very much with the Kim report, which talks about alerts for repairs to prevent missed appointments. There is a lot around here that goes in this particular area of how you make lives easier through technology. The services will understand more about the people who use them, which means those people have to understand less about how services work. Again, think about the components that you are collecting, what data it is, and how that data will help you deliver these very specific digital services. And the services will come to users, not the other way around. And this is something that I think in the sector, I have seen quite a lot of development, trying to be there when they need it through apps in a very flexible way. And then this is absolutely essential that will work, public services will work for everyone. A lot of emphasis around disabled people, no one having difficulties accessing this, and kind of delivering a system that actually works for everyone. So just wanted to pick a few things. This has just come out very recently, and I think as we work through and we see some of the work on the pilots that they're running and some of the applications that are going to come up, it will become clearer. But particularly for colleagues from local authorities, I'm sure you've begun to hear about this. But I think it's important, if we can participate and engage in this transformation, it will make a big difference. So that's it. That's all I have. My key takeaways: look at machine learning opportunities as well as the new generative AI. Don't just get blinded by the new thing. Explore the potential of generative AI to manage organizational knowledge. It could be a good opportunity also on the Kim front. Understand the 21 recommendations of the Kim report. Spend time working through the key data to collect for residents. Explore what the NHF are doing as part of Knowing Our Homes program. Very useful information there. Use this strong data foundation to develop digital services and follow closely what the government is doing to transform digital services. So I think that's it. I will stop, and hopefully there's time for a bit of a conversation in the last few minutes. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for that, Arturo. It's really covered the topic in great detail there, and there's things that you've definitely taught me today that I wasn't aware of already. So thank you for that. Yeah, if anyone does have any queries, feel free to pop those into the chat. We have got a little bit of time left to cover those off, but as you're doing so, there's a couple which kind of jumped into my head, Arturo, as you were talking through there. The first one kind of links to your point around recommendation 11 and that Kim report, which is the review existing databases for capability, capacity to record these key data requirements. And I think based on the conversations that we have with housing associations from our perspective as a consultant but digital solutions provider as well, is that quite a lot of associations still struggle today with quite legacy and outdated systems, but also inconsistent data within those systems. And it's sometimes a case of, okay, so do we need to go away and put forward a big digital strategy, clean up all of our data first, and then at that point we're ready then to implement a new system? Or do you see it as more of a case of, let's make the technology change first and then the sort of data alongside it? I sometimes feel there's a bit of a blocker there around progression on either way. What's your sort of take on that from your experience?
I think the whole systems question, if you think about how the systems came into the kind of the Ombudsman report, it came from the fact that a lot of organizations feel that the challenge with answering to complaints properly from residents comes from the fact that systems don't talk to each other, systems are inconsistent, people are not well trained on the systems. That's where this recommendation comes from. But ultimately, it does touch a kind of a higher level point, which is, are the technology systems that we have in housing fit for purpose for what is needed? And I think your question around migrations is really something that is quite tangible. You see the need to migrate the technology, and always there will be a data stream, but there's a lot of compromises, and there's organizations that end up picking up some of the data work in terms of consolidating or migrating and doing some data quality checks before the migration for years. So I think the spirit of this recommendation is very much about ensure that your systems are fit for purpose for you to get the right information to respond to what the residents are saying to you via the complaints mechanism. But it talks to the bigger point that ultimately technology in the sector will continue to limit us unless we can actually develop it further, and this is very true for digital as well.
Makes sense. Great stuff. Thank you, Arturo. We have had a couple of queries through the chat. First one from Grace, who mentions firstly a thank you to you, Arturo, for the session as well. But are there any aspects of GDPR that we need to be concerned about when using Gen AI?
Yeah, definitely. I think to me, there's very much all the ones that you would normally have around where data is stored and what data are you feeding into Gen AI, particularly if it's these publicly internet ones. But I think probably the more subtle one is around, there is a clause in GDPR that talks about automated decision making and kind of the need to be vigilant around any processes that have an automated decision that actually impacts the resident. And I think Gen AI is not yet at the stage where it's making decisions, but if we think about the direction of travel with agents and perhaps agents in a coordinated way, debating kind of between agents what decision to make, it might be that we get to that space relatively soon. So I think that's an area that I would definitely look at. Then the other thing that is very important is that, the data that we've collected, this is why I wanted to focus on this work from Knowing Our Homes, because it's such a clear baseline of data that we're collecting for the right purpose. Actually, when you hoover all of the organizational data into an algorithm or an LLM to try and derive some knowledge, there'll be a lot of stuff in there that you never meant and was never collected for that purpose. So I think understanding the purpose for which the data was collected will be the other big GDPR question around this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Hopefully that answers your question there. Okay, Grace. A couple more queries in the chat as well. It does. They both kind of link loosely to a query that we had within the registration form around sort of sharing as well, actually. But one from Paul Smith, who was asking if you know of any housing providers that have produced a KIM strategy, and if there's anything that you could signpost us to sort of help with that. Anyone that's working directly on addressing those KIM points you know of?
This is really interesting. I think so far it's more bringing the KIM element into other strategies and ensuring that other strategies that already exist have. So I haven't seen a KIM strategy specifically written, but what I've seen a lot is saying all of these elements of the KIM strategy are either captured in the data governance policy or in the data strategy or in some implementation. So I think there is a and I don't know, is it Paul who asked the question, Jake?
Yeah.
I don't know, Paul, in your organization what it's like, but part of what we need to think about is that sometimes the response is there is a regulatory request and there's a response which is a strategy, and that kind of in a way deals with the requirement, where the requirements of KIM are much more about, yes, get a strategy is one of the recommendations, but actually really think about how you're doing knowledge and information management in your organization. If it's tackled elsewhere, great. Does it have the governance? Does it have the oversight? Is it really embedded into people's day-to-day jobs? Are people being trained on all these aspects? So yeah, I think it's very interesting. But the signpost more than anything, Paul, is to the Housing Ombudsman's website, which have got, I don't know if people have been to their e-learning platform. So they've got an e-learning platform where you can go and do the courses, very, very good material. And I think that's a really very good start on this topic. And it's not only for people particularly dealing with complaints. I think anyone who is working in data should have a look at that, because it's excellent material.
Excellent. Okay, great stuff. Thank you for that one. And another one from Vanessa, who is currently working on drafting usage guidance to support the IT AI usage policy, which restricts entry of personal data within there, etc. But the question is, if you've seen any really good comms style guidance documents around this from housing associations, from local authorities, local government. Because Vanessa's point, I don't think you should apologise for this, Vanessa. It's a good point. She's keen to try and stop the risk of lazy employees using it to do their work for them.
Well, I mean, okay, so let me answer the question first. So I will include, I will share the slides after the session, and I will add a section with some pointers to good practice policies, because there are some that have been published. I think the LGA published one, and I think, if I'm not wrong, Socketing published one.
Okay.
There's a couple in the academic sector as well. So let me just find, and I'll add them to the deck before
Brilliant.
it gets shared. But the other point you mentioned is really the one I think will be the next level. Probably the prediction for 2025 will be, when will HR teams start thinking about what is appropriate in terms of, like, say, for example, if you're asked to write a report and you go and use ChatGPT to write that report, and then you just edit it. And instead of taking 5 hours, it took you 1 hour, and then you spent the other 4 hours doing whatever you wanted. Is that something that needs to be managed at an organizational level? And how are teams going to start engaging with that? That's something that in a policy you need to be able to say, this is what's expected of people to be doing on their own. This is what we expect people to get some help from AI. I think those discussions I haven't seen any organization yet tackling that, perhaps because the usage is not yet sanctioned officially. It's more people probably trying to get trying to break through the blockages in their network to access it. But once it starts becoming more standardized, these are the kind of questions that are going to come up.
Makes sense. Great stuff. Thank you. Vanessa said that was very helpful as well, so thank you for that. Yeah, probably time for the one final question, I suppose, which came from Steph, CEO at Golding Homes, as part of her registering for the event today. And it focuses around how can we collaborate across the sector to reduce implementation costs, particularly for smaller housing associations, and something we've been asked a few times before ourselves, but I don't know if you wanted to kick off on that one.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely the effort around kind of the data standards and kind of the work that the NHF are doing will help, and I think collaborating on that will definitely help. Now, when it comes to systems, I think part of the challenge is that everyone has a different flavor, a different process, a different nuance, and that perhaps increases the complexity. So I think it's a combination of collaborating in terms of what works from a data perspective, which will make it a lot easier to have more standard systems. Now, probably the answer then comes around how much can the processes be standardized? How much can people work in the same way in order to make it easier to have a system that can be shared amongst many different organizations? I think we know that the sector is good at collaborating, but when it comes to truly crowdfunding opportunities for big developments, I think that's more of a challenge. So I agree, and hopefully this effort around the standards, which actually you'll see in the slides and some of the links, is sponsored heavily by the MHCLG. I think will start bringing from the foundation some of those benefits.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's something we've had to react to and kind of adapt our approach internally at Prodo, to be honest. we provide and deliver lots of customer self-service portals and apps and websites and platforms of this kind of nature, that customer interface piece. And yeah, the last couple of years we've focused quite heavily ourselves on taking the learnings from hundreds of very, very bespoke and quite large scale individual implementations into a more repeatable product. And in that case, it's much quicker and therefore cheaper for us to implement these products. And the focus then is on, yeah, let's work together as a community to inform what's coming next within that product. And the difference is essentially our, you know, systems integration rather than the entire sort of application itself. But yeah, it certainly feels like the days of having to go away, create a massive list of requirements, and then have someone build something from scratch for you is probably in the past now. For those kind of reasons that you mentioned, I suppose. Um, but no, really interesting. So thank you for the questions as well, everyone, and for the questions upon sort of registering as well. That probably does kind of bring us to a conclusion, to be fair. So just based on time, and there's plenty of questions we could carry on talking about this all day by the sounds of it, which is brilliant. But massive thank you to you, Arturo, for sharing such valuable insights on these topics around AI, data, and digital in the space. It comes across like whilst it is a very exciting time from an AI point of view in terms of opportunities, getting that fundamentals of data quality and digital service design right is probably the key part of making the most out of those advancements. And as we do look ahead to the rest of this year and sort of going forwards, it is almost kind of striking that balance between innovation but responsibility in these sort of areas as well, considering transparency, accessibility, and sort of everything that goes with it. So thank you very much for your effort and insight. Every time you come on this session, it feels like, oh, I think that might have been our best session yet, you know. So thank you for that again. And thanks to everyone who joined today as well, and your questions and taking the time to listen. So we've recorded today's session, so that will be available on our YouTube later on or tomorrow. As Arturo says, we'll have the slide deck as well once those sort of tweaks and additional bits of content are added in there, so we can share that with you all as well. And if you're interested in joining for the next session, that'll be last Thursday in February, so the 27th at 11 a.m. And the topic for that following one will be breaking down barriers to digital inclusion. So we'll be discussing practical strategies on improving access to online services, discuss the legal and sort of ethical responsibilities around that, and from a digital inclusion point of view, and talk about tenant engagement, but compliantary elements of that as well. So if you're interested in joining that, feel free to head over to the Housing Hive page and sign up there as well. But yeah, I suppose closing remarks. Just wanted to thank you all again, and yourself, Arturo, for that great session. As I say, I learned plenty myself today as well, so I can take that information through myself. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you guys for the next one.